One early autumn morning, when the university campus was still enveloped in the scent of wet grass and burnt coffee from the student cafe at the corner of the library. I am Landon, sophomore, majoring in communications, living in the North Dorm, the type who likes to arrive at class early just to sit alone and observe the world. I don't really believe in fateful moments, but there are days when everything happens as if someone deliberately set the pieces in place. Theodore walked into the modern American literature class 5 minutes late, his jacket shoulder still carrying a chill. He apologized to the professor with a short smile, then looked for an empty seat, right next to me. I remember his eyes clearly, gray-blue, sharp like a foggy morning. I remember the way he set his backpack down, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the general atmosphere. When he sat down, our arms brushed, just a very light touch, but I almost pulled my hand away, almost pretended nothing happened. During class, the professor talked about missed stories, unfinished choices in American literature. I didn't hear it clearly. I only heard the sound of Theodore's pen scratching on paper, steady, like a heartbeat I unconsciously synced with. When class ended, he turned to ask if I had the PDF of last week's reading. I did. I gave it to him. He thanked me, asked my name. Landon, I asked back. Theodore, he said, then smiled. Everyone calls me Theo. We started talking like that, naturally enough that I didn't realize I was stepping into a story that would later weigh on me with 2 words. Almost. We walked together to the parking lot, talking about changing majors, late nights, being away from home. Theo was from Oregon, liked hiking and film photography. I was from Ohio, liked writing and old indie music. There were silences between us, but not uncomfortable. Silences where you know you can put your hand down without fear of falling. The following weeks, we studied together. At first in the library, 3rd floor with the big windows overlooking the lawn. Then the cafe. Then my room, where the walls were plastered with old posters and the yellow lamp always stayed on late. We read assignments, debated characters, and gradually talked about other things. Theo told me about his first relationship. A guy from high school, ended quietly. I told him about how I almost came out but pulled back because I was afraid of disappointing my parents. We didn't say it outright, but we both understood. One rainy evening, the electricity in the dorm flickered. We sat on the floor, backs against the bed, laptop half open. The hallway light cast a dim glow. Theo talked about the first photo he took, a wet road reflecting yellow lights. I said he should exhibit it. He shook his head, smiled sadly. Some things I keep for myself. I wanted to say, me too, but I didn't. Another almost. The closer we got, the more scared I became. Afraid to name what was growing between us. Afraid to break the fragile balance. Once, when we watched a movie in my room, Theo fell asleep on the couch. His head rested on my shoulder. I could count each breath. I didn't dare move. I thought about if I leaned down just a little, everything would change. I didn't. Almost. Outside, autumn turned cold. Leaves changed color. The university looked like a photo edited with warm tones. Theo started spending more time with the photography club. I had more assignments. We still met, but less often. Each time, I noticed the things I hadn't said. There was an invisible distance, like an unfinished sentence. The climax was the department's small party. Loud music, green and red lights. I was standing by the drink table when I saw Theo talking to another guy. Tall, brown hair, hand placed naturally on Theo's back. My heart tightened. I wondered what right I had to be jealous. I hadn't said anything. I stepped outside to breathe. When Theo found me, he asked if I was okay. I said, fine. I'm good at lying when needed. He looked at me for a long time, like waiting for something. I didn't say it. Almost. That night, I went back to my room, opened my laptop, tried to write. But the words only revolved around one thing. The weight of 2 words almost pressing on my chest, so heavy I couldn't breathe. I didn't know then what I was more afraid of, losing Theo or the chance to become the person I wanted to be. After that night, I avoided Theo clumsily. Not the kind of complete disappearance, but slower replies to messages, excuses about being busy studying, busy working extra at the media library. I convinced myself that distance would make everything easier to breathe. But the truth was each gap only made the two words almost heavier, like carrying a backpack full of rocks that I didn't dare set down. Theodore wasn't one to give up easily. He found me after class, waiting on the steps in front of the humanities building. Winter had arrived, the wind cutting. He handed me a hot coffee without asking if I wanted it. "You've disappeared," Theo said, his voice not accusatory, just tired. I smiled, said some nonsense about deadlines. He looked at me, that familiar gaze, and I knew I was standing at a boundary. I could tell the truth, or I could step back. I chose to step back. Almost. We walked together for a bit. The first snow fell sparsely, thin like dust. Theo said he had a photography trip coming up that weekend. A small cabin near the lake organized by the club. He asked if I wanted to go. I did. I wanted to say yes immediately, but I thought about the guy at the party, thought about how I wasn't brave enough yet. I said I had to stay for assignments. Theo nodded, didn't say more. That moment passed, light as snow, but left a lingering cold. That weekend, I stayed in my room, looking at the photos Theo posted. Pine forests, frozen lake, silvery gray light. One photo reflected a figure on the water. I wondered if he thought of me. I wondered if things would be different if I were there. Almost is a strange word, it's not complete failure, but not success either. It hangs, not letting you rest. As the semester neared its end, pressure weighed on everyone. Assignments, exams, summer decisions. I applied for an internship in New York. Theo got accepted into a photography program in California. We sat across from each other in the familiar cafe, talking about the future like two parallel lines. I heard my voice congratulating him, sounding very calm. Inside, I wasn't. One late evening, Theo knocked on my door. I opened it, saw him standing there, thin jacket, eyes red from wind or something else. I didn't know. "I don't want to leave without clarifying," he said. The room was silent. I heard the heater humming steadily. Theo said he wasn't good at guessing, that he felt something between us, but wasn't sure if I felt the same. I stood there, hand gripping the hem of my shirt, heart pounding. Here it was, the moment where all the almosts piled up. I could say, "Me too." I could step forward, touch his hand. I could choose myself. But the old fear of loss, fear of change, fear of having to explain, rose like a cold wave. I said I valued him, but I wasn't ready. I said I didn't want to complicate things. After saying it, I felt myself shrink. Theo nodded slowly, as if prepared for that answer. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for being honest," he said. The door closed behind him. I sat on the bed, feeling like I just missed the last train. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about all the moments. Arms brushing, silences, unspoken words. Almost was no longer an abstract word. It had a face, a voice, the smell of coffee and snow. The day Theo left, I didn't see him off. I said I had an exam. That was the last lie of the semester. When his plane took off, I was sitting in the library, looking out at the empty lawn. I told myself I'd chosen safety, but safety has its own weight, and I was carrying it alone. Summer came like a prolonged silence. New York was noisy, hot, and unforgiving. I interned at a small magazine in Brooklyn, editing articles daily, running errands, learning to stand still in a city that never stands still. At night, I returned to my cramped rented room, opened the window for the hot wind to blow in, and thought about Oregon, about California, about places I'd never set foot in but felt familiar because Theo was there. We still texted. Not much, not intimately. The polite check-ins of two people who almost were something more. Theo sent photos, coastal roads, slanting sunlight, strange faces. I replied with short sentences, sometimes with a professional comment. I hid the urge to ask, "Are you happy?" I was afraid of the answer. One evening, I drank beer alone on the apartment steps, watching the city lights flicker. I thought about how I'd always chosen not to choose. I wrote in my notebook, "Hesitation is also a decision." That line made me uncomfortable. But I didn't erase it. As summer neared its end, I received an email from Theo. Not a short message, but a long email. He wrote about classes, about learning to print photos in the darkroom, about the first time he dared to hang a photo and stand watching others look at it. He wrote that there were moments he thought of me, not with reproach but like a faint line in a photo that would appear if adjusted right. The last line, "I'm coming back to school this semester. I think we should talk." I read that email many times. I left it open on the screen, as if closing it would make it disappear. I was scared and relieved at the same time. I wondered if I dared to be different. Autumn returned, the same yet different. I came back to school with a new feeling, no longer completely believing my own excuses. The first day I saw Theo again was in the old library. He looked thinner, hair longer, eyes the same. We hugged, a short, awkward hug. I felt the distance clearly, not physical, but what had happened when we weren't in the same place. We sat across from each other, talking about summer. I told him about New York, about learning to say no to things that weren't mine. Theo told me about California, about different light, about daring to try. There were silences, but this time I didn't rush to fill them. I let them exist. Finally, Theo asked, "Are you still scared?" A simple question, not accusatory. I thought for a long time. I told the truth. Yes, but I'm tired of being scared. Saying it was like exhaling after holding my breath too long.
Theo nốt đét.
He said he didn't need me to be sure about the future. Just don't turn the present into a chain of almosts. We didn't rush into each other. No big promises. Just long walks, study sessions again, hand touches without quick withdrawals. One evening, sitting on the steps, cold wind, Theo placed his hand on mine. I didn't pull away. My heart beat fast, but I stayed. It wasn't a victory, just a small choice at the right time. Then there was the first kiss. Not perfect, a bit shaky, happening after a small photo exhibition. I remember the smell of paint, white lights, and the way Theo smiled before leaning down. I thought, finally, it's not almost. But I also knew those two words wouldn't disappear completely. They just became lighter when you dared to set them down. Even so, life didn't turn into a straight line. There were days I wanted to retreat again. Days Theo needed space. We learned to speak out, awkwardly, slowly. I learned not to stay silent when I needed to speak. Theo learned not to carry everything himself. We weren't perfect, but we were present. One late evening, I opened my notebook again, crossed out the old line, added, "Courage doesn't erase fear. It just makes fear less powerful." I thought about all the almosts that had passed. They didn't disappear, but they no longer controlled me. The semester flew by faster than I imagined. Maybe because for the first time I wasn't just living in my head. Theo and I didn't label our relationship, not out of fear, but because we were learning to be in it first. In America, everything tends to be named, publicized, defined. But we chose slow. Slow to not repeat the old almost. There were mornings I woke up in my room, seeing Theo's jacket draped over the chair. Evenings I stayed in his room, watching him edit photos on his laptop, blue light casting on his focused face. I liked those very ordinary moments, no drama, no audience. They made me believe that love isn't always climax. Sometimes, it's just someone remembering you take your coffee black. But fear doesn't disappear just because you name it. It returns in new forms. Once, Theo got an email about an exhibition opportunity in San Francisco short-term, but with potential to open many doors. He told me while we were having dinner in the cafeteria. I smiled, congratulated him, said it was great news. But that night, back in my room, I felt my chest heavy. I realized I was afraid of a familiar thing. Losing because I didn't speak in time. We had our first argument the following week. Not loud.
No tears.
Just circling sentences, avoiding the center. I said I supported him. Theo said he needed me to say more clearly. I stayed silent. That moment stretched, and I realized my silence was doing the old thing again. I took a breath, said I was scared. Scared of distance. Scared I wasn't enough. Saying it made my voice tremble, but saying it also lightened the room. Theo didn't promise to stay. He didn't promise anything beyond his ability. He just said he chose me now and wanted me to choose him now. That was different from the lifelong promises I'd once feared. It was smaller, and thus more real. We decided to live with that decision. San Francisco became a possibility, not a ghost. I helped Theo select photos. He helped me edit my final essay. We had very close nights, and days each doing our own thing. I learned not to read every silence as a sign of parting. Theo learned to speak out when he needed me. One afternoon, I stood in front of the department bulletin board, looking at the list of students selected for a special project. My name was there. I texted Theo immediately. He called back, voice excited. In that moment, I realized what I'd once feared. Letting someone into my life was also what doubled the joy. At the end of the semester, snow fell heavily. The school was emptier. We walked around the campus, breaths turning to mist. Theo talked about if the exhibition went well, he might stay in San Francisco for a few months. I talked about possibly transferring part of my project there. Not out of clinging, but because we were considering together. I heard myself say those sentences, and was surprised my voice didn't tremble. There were nights I still dreamed of the old almost. But when I woke, Theo was beside me, or there was his message. The present doesn't erase the past, but it gives the past a new context. I started rewriting my story, not to erase the hesitations, but to understand them. Once, in creative writing class, the professor asked us to write about a word that had followed us the longest. I wrote about almost. I wrote about its weight, and how it lightens when you dare to take one more step. When I read it aloud in class, I didn't look at Theo, but I knew he was there. After class, he held my hand, said nothing, just squeezed lightly. Enough. I don't know what our future will be. I know we'll still be scared, still argue, still make hard choices. But I also know one thing. I no longer let my life pass by with 2 words almost. And for me, that's already a big change. Everything started to slow down as winter passed. Not in a fading way, but like a deep breath after running too long. I realized I no longer counted every moment with Theo like before. Not because they were less important, but because they'd become a natural part of the day. That was both comforting and scary. Because when something becomes familiar, you have more to lose. San Francisco finally wasn't a vague idea anymore. Theo got confirmed for the exhibition. 3 months. We sat on his room floor, papers spread around. I read the terms aloud. Theo listened and nodded. The atmosphere was serious, like when you decide to buy something big. Not entirely because you want to, but because you believe you can handle the consequences. You don't have to follow me, Theo said, voice careful. I knew he wasn't testing me. He was just opening a door. I said I knew. I said I wanted to be there in the way I could. I didn't say grand things. I talked about remote work for a few weeks, about weekend visits. Practical sentences, but for me, that was courage. The day Theo left, I saw him off at the airport. Unlike before. No lies. No empty library. We stood at security, hands intertwined. I didn't say, don't go. I said, text me when you arrive. Theo smiled, kissed my cheek lightly. A small gesture, but public. I felt my heart race, but not from fear. From living. Distance teaches you many things. Teaches you how to trust, and how to doubt yourself when trusting. Some days we talked for hours, sharing every little detail. Some days schedules clashed, only time for a short message. I learned not to interpret silence as rejection. I learned to ask directly when needed. Theo learned to speak out tiredness instead of disappearing. I came to San Francisco for the first time in the 2nd month. The city was different from New York, hilly, windy, cold light. I stood in front of the small gallery, seeing Theo's name on the flyer. I felt a quiet pride. When I walked in, Theo was talking to guests, looking confident and unfamiliar. When he saw me, his eyes changed, softened. He held my hand in front of everyone. I thought about the Landon from a year ago. He wouldn't have dared. That night, we sat on the balcony, watching the city sink into fog. Theo asked if I regretted not speaking sooner. I thought for a bit. I said yes, but not to punish myself. I regretted like someone who understands the lesson after paying the tuition. The two words almost don't disappear. They become reminders. When the exhibition ended, we faced another decision. Theo had an offer to stay. I had a chance to continue my project at school. No perfect choice. We sat down as we'd learned and spoke truthfully.
No evasión. No guessing.
In the end, Theo decided to return, not giving up but wanting to build a stronger foundation before going far. I didn't ask for that, but I appreciated it. We returned to school in a warmer spring. Things didn't become easy just because we'd chosen each other, but we had a common language to face them. I continued writing. Theo continued photographing. There were evenings we sat in silence, each doing our own thing, and I realized this silence was no longer almost. It was enough. I wouldn't dare promise we'd never miss a beat, but I dare promise myself that I won't let fear decide for me anymore. The weight of two words, almost, is still there. Like a memento you keep to remember what you've been through. But now, I'm strong enough to carry it without bending over. Senior year came with a different feeling. No longer naive excitement, nor vague panic. It was like standing on a long bridge, seeing the other shore clearer, but still with enough water flowing below to remind that everything can change course. Theo and I moved into a small apartment off campus. Not an impulsive decision, but the result of many talks, many pros and cons lists. The apartment was old, creaky wooden floors, windows overlooking a quiet street. We repainted a wall, hung Theo's photos, stacked my books. Very ordinary tasks, but for me it was how we said we're choosing each other. Living together wasn't a continuous romantic soundtrack. It had bills, unwashed dishes, silent mornings because someone didn't sleep well. Once, I got irritable over a small thing. Theo forgot to say he'd be home late. The old feeling rose in me, the feeling of being left behind. I realized I was facing another almost stayed silent, almost built a wall.
I chose differently.
I spoke out. Not perfect, but honest.
Theo apolit.
We learned a little more about each other. Post-graduation pressure started weighing heavy. Friends talked about jobs, new cities. I got a job offer in Chicago. Theo had a long-term project in Seattle. 2 cities, 2 good opportunities. I looked at the map on the screen, flight paths crossing like questions without quick answers. We didn't avoid it. We scheduled an evening, turned off phones, and talked. That talk was long. There were tears, silences, hard sentences, that we loved each other, but didn't want to sacrifice ourselves to the point of resentment. That love shouldn't be a chain of new almosts. Almost had the life I wanted. Almost pursued my dream. In the end, we chose temporary separation, not breakup, but a clear agreement, time-limited, with commitment to meet again. 1 year. Sounds simple, but saying it made me tremble. Moving day, the apartment was emptier than I imagined. I helped Theo pack his photos. He helped me fold clothes. We hugged for a long time.
No vague promises.
Just specific ones. Call days, meet days, return days to discuss the future. When the door closed, I felt pain. But it was pain with shape, not the pain of the unsaid. Chicago was cold and windy. The new job swept me away. I learned to live alone again, but not lonely. Theo and I kept the rhythm. Sometimes off, then adjusted. Sometimes tired, then rested. I realized I'd changed. I no longer feared that loving meant losing myself. I also no longer feared speaking out when needed. A year passed faster than I thought. When we met again, this time in a midway city, I looked at Theo and saw both changes and familiarity. We sat in a quiet cafe, talking about what we'd learned when not together. Not to check, but to understand. I said I'd once thought almost was the enemy. Now I think it's the teacher, harsh but necessary. We didn't rush to decide right away. But one thing was clear, we no longer avoided. When we talked about choosing a shared city, it was no longer a question that choked me. It was a problem with many solutions, and we were solving it together. That evening, I opened my laptop, reread the old writing pages, full of hesitation. I didn't delete them, I added to them. My story no longer ended with what if. It continued with this time, I choose. We chose Boston. Not because it was geographically between Chicago and Seattle, but because it was between the people we'd become. A city old enough not to rush, new enough not to stagnate. When I said that aloud, I realized I was no longer speaking from fear or compromise. I was speaking from a rare understanding that I'd traded many almosts to gain. The day I moved first, the apartment was still empty. I opened the window, let the sea breeze in, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel empty being alone. A few weeks later, Theo arrived. He stood at the threshold, pulling his suitcase, eyes scanning as if taking a mental photo. When he smiled at me, I knew this wasn't an experiment. This was a conscious choice. The new life didn't come with fireworks. It came with work schedules, cooking evenings, mornings where someone wakes earlier. Theo had a small studio. I had a writing corner by the window. We learned to respect each other's space, not as a fence, but as two overlapping circles. Some days overlapping a lot, some a little, but no longer almost. One afternoon, I was invited to read my writing at a small event. That piece was about hesitation, about how people can live a lifetime in the waiting space. When I finished reading, I looked down at the seats. Theo was there. He didn't clap the loudest. He just looked at me, nodded, as if saying, "I know." And that was more than any applause. We didn't avoid bumping into each other. There were arguments about time, priorities. But unlike before, we didn't let them turn into prolonged silences. I learned that speaking early doesn't weaken love. It makes it last longer. Theo learned that strength isn't always carrying everything alone. One evening, while reorganizing books, I found the old notebook. Lines about almost. I reread, smiled. Theo sat beside me. He asked if it still felt heavy. I thought for a bit, then shook my head. "Not as heavy as before," I said. "It reminds me how scared I once was, and how far I've come." If someone asked me what defines our love, I wouldn't say with big milestones. I'd say with very small moments. A hand not withdrawn, a word not swallowed, a time choosing to stay when retreating is easier. I'd say the weight of two words almost doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls me. Stands behind, like a shadow reminding. I am Landon. I once lived in things that hadn't happened. Now, I live in things that are happening, imperfect, not absolutely certain, but real. And when I look at Theo, in the apartment full of afternoon light, I know that this time, I'm not standing at the boundary anymore. I've crossed over.